In the late 19th century, mysterious cities appeared all over the world, as if from nowhere. They were majestic ensembles built in the classical style, with enormous domes, endless colonnades, statues, and palaces. These cities, which official history calls the World's Fairs, shared one strange fate. They were all destroyed. Hundreds of magnificent buildings, entire districts built on an incredible scale, vanished almost without a trace. Who would create such incredible structures only to immediately tear them down? And behind this facade of progress, could something far more ancient and significant be hiding? Perhaps these weren't temporary decorations for a fair, but the last tangible traces of a world that has been deliberately hidden from us. These ghost cities emerged rapidly, their scale staggering the imagination. The 1901 Pan American Exposition is a striking example. Tiny human figures wander among giant statues and monumental pedestals, lost against the backdrop of colossal architecture. These spaces feel as if they were built not for humans, but for giants. The palaces and pavilions loom over the viewer, as if to remind them of their true place in this world. But the real mystery begins when we try to understand the purpose of all this splendor. The official version states that the World's Fairs were purely commercial events, showcases of technological progress. They were platforms where leading nations displayed their achievements: steam engines, electric generators, the first telephones, and railways. Places where contracts were signed, factories were opened, and trade routes were established. It was all for the sake of profit and a demonstration of industrial might. This sounds logical, but that logic falls apart the moment we look away from the machines and at their surroundings. Why build entire cities of stone with giant domes, spires, and statues for a temporary fair scheduled to last only a few months? What does the enormous statue of a Roman emperor at the Chicago exhibition symbolize? What does it have to do with trade and industry? The questions multiply with every step through these vanished avenues. Why, among the steam engines and electrical novelties, does a rostral column suddenly appear, decorated with the prows of ships, as if transported from an ancient harbor? Why are the pavilions guarded not by portraits of presidents or busts of great inventors, but by stone lions, griffins, and winged gods? The names of these mythical heroes and creatures have long faded from human memory, yet their images continued to dominate this festival of progress. At first glance, the fairs were a hymn to the coming new era of electricity, the telephone, and radio. Humanity was entering the 20th century, illuminated by the light of science. But if you look closely at the buildings themselves, at their stucco, bas-reliefs, and sculptures, it becomes clear. They are trying to tell us something entirely different. It was a strange dual language. On one hand, a declaration of a technological breakthrough. On the other, an architecture steeped in the symbolism of an ancient, almost forgotten power. It was as if the unseen organizers were saying, "Yes, we are giving you technology. We are giving you light and new opportunities. But do not forget who is above you. Do not forget the true hierarchy of this world." This strange discrepancy, this duality, permeated everything. And all these inexplicable elements were subject to a single style, which historians would later call Beaux-Arts. Officially, it's just a fashionable French architectural movement from the late 19th century. But when you look at these giant halls, domes, and symbols, you realize this is not just architecture. This style is too strange, heavy, and almost oppressive. It lacks practical logic, it lacks utility, but it possesses something more, an echo of another civilization. What if it's not just a style, but an encrypted code? The key to understanding the true purpose of these grand and fleeting structures. This architectural language, commonly known as Beaux-Arts, is too simple a name for what it truly represents. This is not just a style, it is a system, a philosophy embodied in stone. Its main feature is a complete disregard for the human scale. Buildings in this style are not designed for comfort or convenience. They are heavy, monumental, and deliberately overpowering. They loom over people, making them feel insignificant. There is no practical utility in this architecture as we understand it. It does not serve everyday needs, but it has another, higher logic, the logic of power and eternity. It is designed not to accommodate man, but to show him his place in a strict and unshakable hierarchy of the universe. Every detail in this language has meaning. These are not mere decorations, but symbols, signs meant to be read. The countless bas-reliefs, statues, and ornaments are not random decor, but a carefully crafted message. When lions or griffins stand at the entrance to a pavilion, it is not just a tribute to classical fashion. In ancient cultures, they were always guardians, protecting the threshold between the world of humans and the world of the gods, between the profane and the sacred. Their presence here is a clear sign. You are entering a special space where different laws apply. The winged figures, whether they are goddesses of victory or angel-like beings, are not just elegant sculptures. They are eternal observers, an all-seeing eye, reminding us that all human actions are under the constant supervision of higher powers. Once you recognize this system, the official story that Beaux-Arts was merely a fashionable French style from the late 19th century begins to seem highly doubtful. Could such a profound language, steeped in ancient symbolism, have appeared out of nowhere, like a passing trend? It seems unlikely. It feels less like an invention and more like a revival, an echo of another, much older and more powerful civilization, for which such architecture was a natural expression of its worldview. It is as if the architects of the 19th century were not creating something new, but were reproducing from memory, or from some surviving blueprints, fragments of a long-lost world. But if that is the case, where else might we have seen such images? The answer comes from a most unexpected source, and the key is a seemingly minor but constantly recurring element. Amid all this architectural diversity at the fairs, one often finds the rostral column, a monument decorated with the prows of enemy ships, an ancient symbol of naval victory. Its presence at an industrial fair in Chicago or Paris is completely illogical. But the most astonishing thing is something else. This column, with all its characteristic details, looks exactly like one found in the engravings of an 18th century artist. His name was Giovanni Battista Piranesi, and he is believed to have drawn only majestic but fictional ruins, the product of his artistic imagination. However, such a precise match forces us to ask, what if they weren't fantasies at all? What if Piranesi was documenting a reality we simply don't know? The work of Giovanni Piranesi, long considered a brilliant but dark fantasy on the theme of ancient ruins, is suddenly seen in a completely different light. His engravings, filled with gigantic arches, fragments of columns, and abandoned temples, cease to be mere art when placed side by side with photographs from the 19th century World's Fairs. This striking resemblance is no coincidence. It is the key to the puzzle. Let's look closely at the foreground of his works. These are not picturesque ruins overgrown with moss. This is chaos. Shards of cornices, broken stone blocks, fragments of statues, all piled together as if after some catastrophe. Now let's transport ourselves to the Chicago Exposition. We see the same sense of a disjointed collection. Statues, columns, pavilions in different styles, all together, all out of place, as if someone tried to reassemble the fragments of a shattered world. And at that moment, a strange but compelling thought arises. What if Piranesi wasn't drawing a fantasy at all? What if we are looking not at imaginary ruins of ancient Rome, but at a real scene that he witnessed in his own 18th century? Not a city, but specifically an exhibition, a stage set, an exposition that brought together the very same things we see in the photographs from Chicago or Paris. It was an attempt to gather the surviving artifacts and symbols of a lost world and display them to new people, perhaps survivors of a global cataclysm. The purpose of such an 18th century exhibition was not commerce. Its purpose was enlightenment, or more precisely, the shaping of a new reality. It was meant to show the natives of a new world how it was truly structured, who to worship, who to fear, who to now consider gods. This hypothesis changes everything. It transforms the fantasy artist into a documentary artist who captured a pivotal historical process. If he was right, then the World's Fairs of the 19th and 20th centuries were not a new phenomenon born of the Industrial Revolution at all. They were merely a continuation, on a larger and more technological scale, of an old and carefully hidden tradition. A tradition of periodically holding grand lessons for humanity, where they were shown their place and reminded of the real rules of the game. But if these were not fairs for selling steam engines, but ideological and educational centers, then what exactly did they teach? If you imagine an ordinary person of that time entering the halls of these giant pavilions, what were they supposed to feel and understand? What message was encrypted in this festival of enlightenment? If we discard the idea of commerce, the true purpose of these grand events becomes clear. These were not fairs, but meticulously staged lessons for entire nations, platforms for ideological conditioning, and the demonstration of absolute power. Imagine the scene. People are brought to the exhibition from different lands and social classes, most of whom have never left their villages. Slaves, whose labor was hard and primitive, are shown that with new technologies they can now cut stone not in 2 days, but in 4 hours. A farmer, who has toiled his whole life behind a plow pulled by 2 oxen, is shown a miracle tool, so light and perfect that now a single horse is enough for the job. For him, this isn't just saved effort. It's magic, a gift from above. Weavers are shown mechanical looms, where the complex interlacing of threads is now handled by the soulless but incredibly efficient power of water or steam. And soldiers are shown new weapons, their gleam reflecting off the marble floors of halls they are only allowed to enter as silent spectators. The exhibition was a success. The memory of it, as a great festival of enlightenment and unseen wonders, would long warm the minds and hearts of those who attended. But the technological novelties were just the bait, the first, most obvious layer of the message. The main lesson was not in them. It was a brilliant psychological device. The gift of technology was not presented in a humble workshop or a market square, but in a temple. In a grandiose palace whose ceilings were lost in the heights, surrounded by statues of winged gods and ancient heroes. The majesty of the architecture became inextricably linked in the viewer's mind with the source of the gift itself. The main message, transmitted through stone and marble, was simple and all-encompassing. We, the unseen architects of this world, give you technology. We give you light, ease your labor, and make your lives better. Accept these gifts, but never forget who is truly in charge. The classical architecture, the statues of gods, the mythical beasts, all served as a constant, non-verbal reminder of a higher power that stands above presidents, kings, and any human government. It was a demonstration of the true hierarchy, encrypted in symbols. This approach explains everything. The inhuman scale, which was meant to inspire sacred awe and suppress the will. The abundance of ancient symbolism, referring to the original sources of power. And finally, the strange mismatch between the stated industrial purpose and the actual classical setting. Technology was the tool, and the architecture was the instruction manual, a reminder of who holds the monopoly on progress. But then, if these magnificent cities were so important as centers for demonstrating power and controlling consciousness, the most logical and most uncomfortable question arises. Why were they so quickly and ruthlessly destroyed? Why were these monumental testaments to power erased from the face of the earth as soon as they had served their purpose? And why was their fate so different in America and in Europe? The mystery of these vanished cities deepens when we begin to analyze the process of their elimination. Until the 1940s, the same thing happened all over the world, as if on command from an unseen hand. Majestic districts with domes and colonnades were rapidly erected, and then just as rapidly, destroyed. However, on closer inspection, it becomes clear that there were two completely different scenarios for this destruction, and geography played a key role in them. The first scenario, which can be called the American Sweep, was implemented in North America. Here, nearly all the exposition cities were wiped from the face of the earth, leaving almost no trace behind. The white stone districts and majestic pavilions vanished, as if they had never existed. The official version, intended to explain this phenomenon, sounds plausible only at first glance. We are told that all these grand palaces and temples were temporary structures, made of cheap materials, wood, plaster, and fabric. They were supposedly just framework decorations, quickly built for the fair and just as quickly demolished after it ended. However, photographs from that era tell a completely different story. These buildings look absolutely monumental, as if they were carved from solid granite or cast from stone. Their massiveness, detail, and scale give the impression of eternal structures, not temporary pavilions. Nevertheless, not a single one of them survived more than a few years. Everything was destroyed. A completely different picture was seen in Europe. There too, the expositions were staged with imperial grandeur, but the fate of their architectural legacy was different. Many of the buildings were not only not destroyed, but continued to exist for decades, becoming part of the urban landscape. One structure stands out in particular: the Trocadero Palace in Paris. This was not a temporary pavilion made of plaster. It was a true giant of stone, over 700 meters long, organically integrated into the city's architecture. But the strangest thing about its history is not its scale, but the mystery surrounding its appearance. Official sources provide no precise construction timelines, no detailed reports, just a dry line, built for the 1878 Exposition. How could such a huge palace complex be erected in a matter of months, or even weeks? One gets the feeling that the palace was not built, but simply discovered, cleared, and presented to the public. This giant stood until 1937, and then it met an equally strange fate. It was not completely demolished, but partially dismantled and rebuilt, transformed into the Palais de Chaillot. From the perspective of logic and the preservation of cultural heritage, destroying such beauty was senseless. And this was not an isolated case. The Dufayel Gallery, a huge department store in the heart of Paris that opened in the late 19th century, was another such artifact. Inside were classical statues, bas-reliefs with obscure symbols, columns, domes, and marble. Everything radiated ancient power. 15,000 people worked in this building, which looked more like a temple of commerce. But in 1931, it was suddenly closed. Its dome was demolished and part of the premises was rebuilt. And once again, silence in the official sources. By comparing these two approaches, a hypothesis can be formed. In America, on the territory of the New World, with its short and largely fabricated history, a complete erasure of memory was required. It was necessary to create a blank slate on which a new desired history could be written, leaving no material evidence of what came before. In Europe, however, where ancient history and architecture had much deeper roots, a complete erasure was impossible. Therefore, a different method was used here: repurposing. The surviving evidence was not completely destroyed, but was rebuilt, integrated into a new context, stripped of its original meaning, and turned into a part of the official, safe history. These surviving and rebuilt structures, like the vanished ghost cities of America, are not just architecture. They are material carriers of memory, messages in stone from a civilization we were never meant to see. So, we have traveled from a few mysterious photographs to a shocking hypothesis that ties together the world's fairs, the engravings of Piranesi, and the possible concealment of an entire civilization. We have seen how the official story of temporary fairs crumbles under the weight of inexplicable facts. The inhuman scale of the architecture, the mismatch between industrial purpose and classical symbolism, and finally, the systematic but selective destruction of these grand ghost cities around the world. The picture that emerges is not a story of progress and trade. It is the story of a grand spectacle, staged on a global scale, whose goal was the formation of a new humanity and a new world order. These expositions were not just a demonstration of technology. They were an act of creating a new reality. Through monumental, overpowering architecture and the language of ancient symbols, people were sent a simple and unambiguous message about their place in this world. It was a lesson in hierarchy, a reminder that above all earthly powers there exists another, higher force, which is the true source of progress and authority. Technology was merely a gift. A tool presented within the walls of a temple to forever link the receiving of benefits with submission in people's minds. And the engravings of Piranesi, which we have been taught to see as fantasy, could very well be the documentary evidence of an early act in this global production, an attempt to build the stage for a new world from the rubble of the old. But these buildings are not just the past. Their symbols and their echoes still surround us, even if we don't realize it. The architectural language of power that was so vividly displayed at the fairs has not disappeared. It continues to live in the facades of government buildings, banks, courts, and universities around the world. Lions and griffins still guard the entrances, columns still support the arches, and classical heroes and goddesses still look down on us from the pediments. This code continues to operate, transmitting ideas of order, strength, and an eternal hierarchy. Perhaps the key to understanding why our modern world is structured the way it is lies in correctly reading these messages in stone, in realizing what program they continue to carry within them. Perhaps this is precisely why the traces had to be so thoroughly erased. The complete destruction in America and the careful remodeling in Europe were two methods for solving one problem: to sever the link between a symbol and its original meaning, to turn the living language of power into a dead architectural style, to destroy the memory that these cities were not built in the 19th century, but perhaps merely restored, and revealed to the world as part of a grand plan. Therefore, the final appeal is to everyone. Start looking at the architecture of old cities not as beautiful scenery from the past, but as evidence in the greatest case of hidden history. Ask yourself, what were the builders really trying to tell us? And why did those who came after them go to such great lengths to make us forget it all?